You are listening to Hillary Topper on Air. And now, here's your host, Hillary Topper.
Welcome back to Hillary Topper on Air. I'm your host, Hillary Topper, and today's show, I have the pleasure of speaking with Matt Fitzgerald, an acclaimed author, coach, and endurance athlete. Matt has written numerous books, including 80-20 Running and How Bad Do You Want It? He's also the creator of Dream Camp, which offers a unique and immersive experience for endurance athletes. Today, we are here to discuss his inspiring career, his father's influence on his life, and his latest book, Chasing Mastery. Hi, Matt. Welcome to the show. So, can you share your background, what led you to become an athlete, a coach, a writer, and also share a little bit about how your dad influenced you to be the man that you are today?
Yes, that is the short answer to that question. I'm a chip off. I'm a chip off the old block. Yeah, my father is a writer also, and by the time I was old enough to read, we had books on bookshelves in the house I grew up in New Hampshire with my dad's name on the spine. And when I was 9 years old, I got the writing bug, and at that age, I remember telling my parents that I was going to be a writer when I grew up, just like my dad, and I never changed my mind at any point. So I've really been on that path. And then my dad ran his first marathon in 1983 when I was 11. So two years later, after I decided I was going to be a writer when I grew up, watched my dad run the Boston Marathon. My two brothers and I actually ran the last mile and crossed the finish line with him. I'm fond of saying that the first mile I ever ran was the last mile of the Boston Marathon. So the very next day I went out for a 6 mile run on my own back home in New Hampshire, and that's when I started running. And so I've been writing and running ever since. I did not actually intend to put the two passions together. It just kind of worked out that way. Just like my first, lucky break in my career after graduating from college was with a startup endurance sports magazine. And then I was really on my way. Got into coaching, started coaching in 2001. Fast forward a quarter century, still coaching. So yeah, that's been my path.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. So we're here to talk about your new book, Chasing Mastery, and it explores what it takes to truly master a skill or a sport. Can you talk about some of the lessons to share with my audience?
Sure thing. Yes. So chasing mastery, I take sort of a developmental view of the athletic journey. The idea is, the first time you ever, go for a run or, go for a bike ride, you are at the very start of a developmental process. Now, if you never follow up the first run with a second one, that's where the developmental process ends. But if you stay in the sport, like you start to develop as an athlete. There's obviously a physical component to that. I mean, we all know that you're not going to, run your fastest mile on your first day of training. It takes time to develop, your physical capacity. But there's also a more holistic way of looking at development, which is kind of a learning process. There's a lot to learn. You have to grow into becoming, the best athlete you can be. And that's really the approach I take in Chasing Mastery, where the way I look at it, there are kind of 5 stages of that developmental journey. You start off with the motivation stage. That's when you fall in love with the sport. People tend to put a lot of emphasis on the training part, but that's really secondary. Yes, it takes a lot of hard work to reach your potential as an athlete, but that work will never be done unless you're highly motivated and motivated in a sustained way. So motivation really is, I think, the foundation in the developmental process. Then comes learning, where you have to learn how to warm up properly, how to, sequence harder days and easier days, like all that stuff that you're not born knowing. You have to learn. But learning is a little bit shallow, where it's like you kind of monkey see, monkey do. To take the next stage in your development, you move from learning to understanding, and that's where you get to the point where you're actually able to make good decisions and responsive adjustments and do problem solving on your own. It's no longer monkey see, monkey do. Like you've actually internalized, the logic and the principles behind the rules, so that you're able to have more agency and be more self-guiding. Even if you have a coach, you still have to make plenty of decisions for yourself. And then from that understanding stage, you move into what I call the individuation stage. And that's where you find, you discover sort of your personal optimal formula. We're all human, so we all generally respond in the same ways to training, but at the level of details, we're all unique. We're unique genetically, physiologically, personality, life experience, culture, environment, like all these ways that like we have to find, just sort of like copying the best practices will take you maybe 80% of the way to the mountaintop. But the other 20% is all about the individuation part, easy for me to say. And then the final stage in that developmental process is what I call the challenge stage. And that is where, you really are very close to mastering the sport, but so that your biggest risk at that point is complacency, like feeling like, maybe even a little arrogance, like, oh, I've got it all figured out. I've been doing this for 10 years now. What else is there left for me to learn? But, champions, they don't think that way. They're always looking to challenge themselves, to get out of their comfort zone, to experiment, try new things, and also to surround themselves by people, coaches and others who will challenge them continuously. So that's part of the reason I call it chasing mastery, is that there really is no endpoint to this process. It can just go on and on and on.
Absolutely. In the book, you talk about talent versus potential, and I don't know, it just resonated with me. Can
Yeah.
you explain that to
Yes.
the
Yes.
community?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, this really gets to my core philosophy as an athlete and as a coach. Sometimes I'll have an athlete who, is more of like a back of the pack type, and every now and then they'll make a remark that seems to indicate that, well, an assumption that I must enjoy coaching fast runners and triathletes more than I enjoy coaching slower ones. And I always call a timeout there. I'm like, absolutely not. Like, I coach athletes toward reaching their potential, and everyone has a different amount of potential, right? And that's really kind of like the talent piece. For me, I was probably somewhere in the middle. I would have loved to go to the Olympics, but I did not have that amount of talent. I knew that when I was 15, but I still loved running enough, and later triathlon, that I wanted to still see what my potential was. And I gave myself permission to do that. And that's the same way I look at it as a coach. So that mastery concept, I think, is very inclusive and democratizing. And let's face it, there are very gifted athletes who come nowhere close to reaching their full potential.
Mhm.
And they might be faster just by virtue of their talent, but you shouldn't pat yourself on the back for being talented. Like, that is, your mom and dad deserve credit for that. But being able to look back on your journey as an athlete and say, wow, it took a while, but I got to the point where I could not be any better at this sport than I became. That is really satisfying, and you do get to pat yourself on the back because you did that. And so whether your potential is great or small, I think everyone who loves their sport and wants to see what they're capable of has a ticket to that ride.
Yeah, I found the book really inspiring. So thank you so much for writing it. Now, you mention in the book that regret is something that you can relate to, but you
Yeah.
didn't really talk about it. Can you give us the inside scoop on that?
Yeah, for sure. So I mentioned that I started running competitively when I was 11 years old. I think I ran my first 10K when I was maybe had just turned 12. And then I ran in high school, and I did well. I was co-captain of a cross country team that won the state championship 2 years in a row. And I was finished top as high as sixth individually in my state. So I was one of the better runners in my state, but I became a head case, and I think I just, for me, looking back on it, I think I just was missing two things. One was maturity, where I just wasn't ready to sacrifice as much as I would have to take that last step to actually be an individual state champion. And I think, also I was lacking guidance. We kind of had a revolving door of mediocre coaches at my high
Mm,
school, and not to put it on them, but I think it would have been difference making to have like a real, like, steady mentor, like in a coaching role at that time in my life. And I didn't. So then it was all on me. And like I said, I wasn't ready. So, all of my personal best times were set as a sophomore, and that shouldn't happen. um, I just did not improve my junior and senior years, and then I ended up
mm,
quitting the sport. And I was supposed to run in college. I didn't. And at that time, I thought I would never run again. I thought, I had my shot. I blew it. I'm just moving on. I ended up getting back into it, and that's when the regret set in, because I did not expect to fall back in love with endurance sports. And when I did, I'm like, oh my goodness, like all those wasted years, some of like my absolute prime years. And so, I don't spend a lot of time brooding about it. And the point I make in the book is like regret can be fuel. Like regret is natural. Like we all have it. And the question is like, what do you do with it?
mm-hmm.
And so that's been, fuel. I mean, I'm 54 years old now, and I still train very hard. I still love to race. And I think a big part of the reason I still have that hunger is because I am partly fueled by regret. I have other fuels too, but like I'm still, trying to make up for that lost time.
Wow. You also talk about principles that apply beyond endurance sports. Can you share examples of how someone might use these five processes in other areas like business or personal hobbies?
Yes. I think there's kind of an understandable but unfortunate tendency to look at sports and athletes and think of them as like entirely physical, because, as a triathlete, I mean, what are you doing? You're using your body. But if you study, elite athletes, what you find is that they're special above the neck just as much as they are gifted below the neck. And so, and that's how you get through that developmental process. In almost every sport, the top 14-year-olds don't become the top 28-year-olds. There's a whole reshuffling that occurs. And so, who's the top 14-year-old in a sport? The most talented. But that's the beginning of the developmental process. So, like, what determines who's the top at age 28, another lifetime later, at the end of, toward the end of that developmental process, is like who develops the most. And that's a mental thing. I mean, it's a psychological thing. It's like, what do you do with what you've been given? That's not a body thing. Your body does the work, but your mind is calling the shots. It's really kind of a learning and a growth process. That is all psychological stuff. And so, we tend to think of sports as physical, but what it takes to reach your full potential as an athlete is basically the same as what it takes to reach the top as an artist or a scientist or a business person or whatever. So, I mean, you name it. Even like, let's just take that individuation stage, like stage 4 of the 5, where you're like, you're learning about yourself, what makes you tick, like how do you respond to different challenges and stimuli. It's the same thing. And let's take me as a writer. Like, I'm not trying to be the best writer in the world. I don't even know how you judge that. Like, I'm trying to be the writer that only I can be, to make a unique. I mean, whether Chasing Mastery is a good book or a bad book, it's only a book that I could have written. Like, it's not something that was already out there, and I take great satisfaction in that. And the reason I'm able to make a unique contribution as a writer is because I've gone through that individuation process where I learn my strengths, I learn my weaknesses, I learn how to strengthen my strengths and to work around and through my weaknesses, and ultimately, hopefully, write good books, not bad books. So yeah, it really is like, you only have one mind, and you apply that mind in all facets of your life. Yeah, so whatever really works in sport is probably going to be your winning formula in other parts of life.
Mm, so interesting. So, a lot of listeners might be looking to push their limits, whether in sports, a career, personal development. What are some practical first steps that they could take to start achieving mastery in those chosen fields?
Uh, Something we haven't mentioned yet that's in the book. So the book has these 5 sections. So it's one section for each of these developmental stages, and then within each section there are 5 like specific lessons that kind of come at that developmental stage from different angles. And after each chapter, there is what's called an implementation intention exercise, and that gets you to like immediately actively reflect on what you've just learned. So, reading can be, a kind of a passive experience. So even if you read a lesson and you're like, wow, that's really eye-opening, good stuff, you might have completely forgotten about it by tomorrow, like as much as you enjoyed it. So those implementation intention exercises are designed to get you to be not just a passive, receptacle for the teaching, but to start using it right away. And that's what each of those lessons does. It's like, first I ask, like, do you agree or disagree with the point I made? To the extent that you agree, like, what are you going to do about it? And I provide guidance on that. So that's a really great, I did not come up with implementation intention exercises, psychologists did, but I find them really useful. So, in whatever field you're in, how do you develop? You develop by learning. How do you learn? You learn by, interacting with the source of the teaching you're receiving. So taking that very active role in using what you've absorbed, I think is very helpful, not just in sport, but whatever it is you're trying to get better at.
Okay, thank you. So, this has been so insightful, and I really appreciate your time. Could you talk a little bit about how one might purchase Chasing Mastery and some of your other books, because they've all been amazing.
There's been a
I'm a
lot of
big
them.
fan.
Thank you. Yeah, well, the cool thing about Chasing Mastery is I'm not only the author of the book, I am also the publisher. Yeah, a few years ago, I started my own publishing imprint called 80/20 Publishing. I have a couple partners in that business. It's small. In fact, I just had a meeting with my partners in that business, like right before I started speaking to you. So I mean, the reason one of the reasons I started that company is that I write a lot of books, and publishers would tell me, you write too many books, you're competing against yourself. And I'm like, I don't care. I have lots of ideas. So now I have my own. I still work through other publishers, but I have my own that I can, if I just have an idea and I want to get it out there. But we are, like I said, a small, like, endurance endemic publisher, but we're also partnered with Simon and Schuster for sales and distribution, which gives us worldwide reach. So this is a very long-winded way of saying the book is available anywhere books are sold. So our website is 8020books.com, 8020books.com. But you can find us in Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the other places.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Matt. I appreciate your time.
My
And
pleasure.
this was a great book, and I encourage everybody out there to pick up a copy of Chasing Mastery. This show was produced by Hillary Topper and sponsored by the Russo Law Group, Long Island's signature elder law, estate planning, and special needs law firm. For more information, visit vjrussolaw.com. And PlayTry, your multi-sport specialist for all your triathlon needs. They have so many opportunities, including franchising. If you love the sport of triathlon, check out playtry.com and learn more about opportunities, or if you want to shop there, check them out. They've got great prices and they've got amazing customer service.